Has anyone been to a wedding with an awkward or cringe-worthy moment that killed the mood? And if so, what happened? True story. We'll call the groom Steve and the bride Julie. This took place in the US. Julie was an immigrant to the US. While Steve and Julie were dating, Steve's sister caught wind of a rumor that Julie had been married previously only for the purpose of getting her green card. Steve confronted her with it. She denied it. He proposed. She said yes. Sister didn't drop it and told Steve's parents what she heard. Fast forward to the wedding day. Pictures at 11. Service at 1. That was the plan. At about 10:30, with the whole wedding party assembled and waiting for pictures to start, there's a family meeting with both families, bride and groom, and pastor in the basement of the church. Bombshell dropped. Steve's parents hired a private investigator to explore the rumor. Rumor confirmed. Julie had lied about the previous sham wedding. Those of us in the wedding party had very little idea of what was happening. We just know there's a row going on in the basement and none of the family members or the bride or groom are in sight. This goes on for an hour or more. We are now at about 20 minutes before the service was supposed to start. No sign of the bride, groom, or families yet. They are literally arguing it out in the church basement to decide whether there's going to be a wedding. Steve is committed. Julie is committed. Steve's parents aren't having it. Steve finally puts his foot down. Wedding proceeds with totally stressed out bride and groom, shaken and very quiet bridesmaid, Steve's sister, who started this whole shit show, a pastor who's wondering what the hell he got himself into, and Steve's extremely angry mother, TL. Doctor, bride to be lied about her immigration status. Groom's parents hired a PI to investigate 20 minutes before game time and no one knew if there was going to be a wedding. Wedding happened 20 years later. Couple still together. Go figure. Screenplay pending. A 45 minutes best man speech with no jokes about a camping trip that the groom and best man went on. It was heavily implied all through the story that things got a bit Brokeback Mountain. Edit. While fully expected this to be lost at the bottom with 2 upvotes. For those wanting more detail, I can't remember much as I have tried to wipe it from my memory. Normally you would expect a joke in a camping story to be like I have never felt closer to you than that night, nudge nudge, wink wink, etc., then move on. This was much more in the vein of that time we spent together is one of my most cherished memories, and I realized that night our souls would be intertwined forever. Super awkward though, and they also did the speeches before the food, and the bar was shut with no table wine, so everyone had to endure this sober and hungry. The groom turned up in an army uniform that very obviously did not belong to him. Nothing fit, and he was wearing trainers. The bride didn't seem to notice, but everyone else did. Actually, every single thing that happened at the wedding was awful. Someone got a fake tan handprint on the wedding dress. The bride's brother's girlfriend wore only lingerie and insulted the bride's grandmother. The father of the groom brought his new wife who lectured us all on paganism. We turned up at the reception to find the reception dinner, a slice of processed ham and a block of cheese each, pickled eggs optional, was out in the element and attracting flies. The cake was cut, then wheeled off to a back room, and never seen again. The bride spent most of the reception in the bouncy castle and the groom disappeared entirely. Bride had no underwear on and the first dance was right in front of a window with the sun shining in. Goodness to say we all got a good look without trying. People clearly treated her differently the rest of the day, and I'm sure she had no idea until she saw her pictures after. They were supposed to light a unity candle, but nobody took off the cellophane. Hilarity ensued. The minister got so flustered that once they finally got it lit, he says, "Like this candle your love will brine shightly." It's all on video. I was the cringe. So I'm about, let's say, 4 years old. My aunt and uncle are getting married in a large beautiful church. My evil older sister starts whispering to me, pointing out that my grandmother is up at the front of the church and she must not see me since she walked right by and hasn't come to see me. Right as my aunt is walking down the aisle, I stand up and start yelling, "Grandma, I'm over here. It's me, yo grandma." Of course my mom basically tackles me to get me to shut up. My grandma still greets me with a yo. I was a little kid and my grandpa was carried me outside the church because there was no way I'd sit through the entire wedding. There was a window behind the altar though, and at one point he brought me up to the window to look inside, and I started excitedly yelling and waving at the groom during a kind of serious part of the wedding. Everyone had to hold their laughter and the groom ended up waving back to me. I then could apparently be heard saying he waved back through the window. Not an awkward or cringy moment, but I just happened to notice that during the first dance the bride looked miserable. I knew her well, and knew her resting face compared to her miserable face. We worked fast food together, you know each other's moods, and it was definitely her miserable face. The awkward moment happened later when new husband clearly wanted to go upstairs and consummate the marriage, but the bride insisted on staying with us cool kids who were drinking until dawn, to forget our own pathetic lives. He stormed up after a good few attempts and we all noticed that. Okay, well at this point it was just anyone under 30 or anyone over 30 who could handle their wine, because it was like 2 AM and we were like, are you sure you don't wanna go up? The bride came out as lesbian a few years ago, and is now happily engaged to her girlfriend, after divorcing the original guy. Felt awful for him, but it turned out she actually tried telling him a few times and all he heard from it was, so we can have a threesome? My cousin's wedding just 2 weeks ago. The bride's parents are divorced because of her father's cheating, beating, drinking, and general nastiness. The father of the bride, who is remarried by the way, calls the bride at 6:30 AM on the morning of the wedding to announce that he will be attending, and that he has taken out a restraining order against her mother's boyfriend of several years that everyone really likes. Claims that if he shows his face the cops will be called to forcibly remove him. Bride cries a lot. New boyfriend says he will be there to support her however she wants, and offers to kick her dad's ass if he tries anything. The bride pulls herself together and asks her two brothers to give her away at the ceremony. The dad shows up, pretty drunk of course, at the back of the church during the procession and sweet talks his daughter into letting him walk her down the aisle. She agrees, I think just to try to prevent a scene, but is basically holding back tears as she starts her wedding. Mom's boyfriend is there, but the wedding progresses as planned, and an hour and a half of full Catholic mass later, they are married. Later on, at the reception, her father walks up to the boyfriend at the front tables in front of a crowd of about 300 and pours a full glass of red wine from a new bottle. He then dumps the entire glass directly over the man's head, soaking him down and staining the white suit he was wearing. Immediately one of the brothers begins punching his father and someone grabs him to hold him back. The father tries to punch him back, so someone else grabs the father and holds him back. Meanwhile the second brother takes this opportunity to beat on the father while his hands are being held. Father gets kicked out, but the mood is completely ruined, awkward and very cringy, so everyone kind of just shuffles out and goes home. I was at a distant relative's wedding reception and all the tables had a bottle each of red and white wine on. There was a delay with the bride and groom showing up to cut the cake and start the meal off, so a few tables popped open the bottles. Then the father of the bride approached all the tables, saying sorry, we didn't ask for wine, and removed all the bottles, including snatching one from the hand of somebody in the process of pouring out. Massively awkward and cringe-worthy, and the rest of the reception was silent afterwards. It turned out the mother-in-law had approved the wine and menu without telling the father of the bride, who was paying for it all, and he wasn't too happy as the bottles were £45 each. I've got two. First was a couple of our friends who had their ceremony officiated by the groom's best friend. Pretty normal thing to do. However, the officiant went into a very detailed speech about his friendship with the groom, like their entire backstory, never mentioning the bride. It was no shit like a 10-minute long speech about these two guys growing up together, and then it abruptly ended, and he did the marriage vows in like 1 to 2 minutes and that was it. Super weird, and the whole crowd was like, WTF was that shit? Second was some cousins of my wife. Apparently the bride's grandmother always writes and reads a poem at the reception about the bride and groom, which sounds nice on the surface. She starts reading this poem, and it becomes apparent this is not a short ordeal. It was no shit like 8 to 10 full fucking pages of poetry about the bride and groom, and she read it in kind of a sing-songy manner. Poetic prose, I guess, and she kept losing her place and dropping pages and having to start over, and it was just the most awkward thing I've ever sat through. It probably took 15 to 20 minutes for her to get through it. By halfway a good portion of the audience had got up and left the hall. and went to the bar and people were just looking around at each other like WTF is this shit. Still a fun wedding though. Edit. Shit, how can I forget my brother's wedding? My other bro was the best man and he wanted to see how long he could make his best man speech before they took the mic away from him, and he just drunkenly rambled on for a good 30 minutes about complete nonsense, including how lucky bro was that he gets to bang his wife tonight and all this shit about sex, until mom took the mic from him and I think kicked him in the ass. I was dying. Edit 2. Apparently I've been to a bunch of shit show weddings because I remembered one more. Went to a wedding of a friend who was a bit of a bitch, but she was still cool. Maid of honor was doing her little speech about the bride and how they met and everything, and people were laughing. Then she started talking about how the bride and groom met and that they were perfect for each other, but she glossed over the fact that the bride met the groom when she cheated on her previous fiancé at another wedding with her current dude she is marrying, and pretty much everyone in the room knew this, and there were audible s heard from everyone in the venue because we all knew she was lying about how they met. Lol. My first wedding was the cringe. Mother-in-law wore black, head to toe, sat in the last pew of church. After wedding she cried, tore her corsage off, ripped it up, and threw it everywhere. Peeled out of the parking lot and laid rubber down the street as we were going to the reception. She went home, drank, and started popping pills. Father-in-law had to call an ambulance to take her to the hospital. Our wedding night consisted of pages going off and phone calls off and on all night. During the bouquet toss, my cousin, who is in her 40s, recently divorced and just had a kid with a random dude, makes a point to tell all the other women and girls who went up to try and catch the bouquet that they need to let her catch the bouquet because it's her turn to get married next. It was super awkward and she even made everyone stand away from her so she had a better chance. Super awkward. My sister got married at the family house. Best man got ripped on Ativan, champagne, and who knows what else. Ceremony began underneath the bride's second story window and the best man handed off the ring to the groom. They stumbled away into the house. We all thought he went to puke. The ceremony continued. Vows were exchanged. Both the I do's happened when my sister looked up for rain clouds as she was sprinkled on. The best man, blacked out on Ativan and alcohol, was peeing on the wedding party from the bride's second story bedroom window. The groom thought it was funny. The bride didn't. A fight ensued and the wedding couple left the scene in separate cars, literally separated at the altar. Wedding was eventually annulled. Last we saw of the groom was the next day when he dumped my sister's possessions out of his pickup onto our driveway. And yes, if you were guessing, Florida man. But the wedding did not happen in Florida. The bride of the groom was filthy rich, so he went all out for this ceremony. Very nice hotel, beautiful ceremony, etc. Very showy but very nice. Ceremony happened, etc. We were all having dinner and then the speeches came. Groom's best friend did a speech, the bride, groom, and finally the bride's dad. Bride's dad's speech was very long. He was so proud of his daughter, had massive printouts of pictures he'd taken of her doing things, and she was growing up. Good vibe, people are having a laugh, etc. Get through a few pictures of her as a baby, then a close-up of her is shown at 3 years old. Just a picture with her head and her shoulders in it, covered up, enjoying a sunny day. Someone in the far corner decides it's appropriate to wolf whistle at the picture of the bride as a 3-year-old. The entire room went silent and nearly every guest grimaced, and you could hear comments of who the hell was that, bit inappropriate don't you think, etc. After that there was a couple of wedding guests that nobody seemed to want to be with. The wife was interacting with people and having a good time. The husband, 60-plus-year-old man, was keeping himself to himself and he just looked nervous and embarrassed for the rest of the night. Gonna take a lucky guess that it was him. Seriously though, why the fuck would you wolf whistle at a picture of a young girl? It was a dark Friday evening wedding at 6:30 p.m. in mid-November. As the bride started to come down the long church aisle, the power went off and the organ faded away as the wind went out of the pipes. The only light came from a few candles way up front near the altar. Otherwise, the vast space was in darkness and the bride was less than 1/4 of her way down the aisle. At this point, guys in the wedding party started singing or whistling "Here Comes the Bride" as altar boys brought lighted candles down the aisle so she could see her way. Two guys went out to their cars for flashlights which they held for the minister to read. The couple looked ghostly with flashlights shining on their faces as they exchanged vows. I was the cringe, and I still feel bad about it to this day. I was a teenager, attending with my high school BF. The wedding was for one of his cousins, in a very large extended family. Boyfriend was an usher. He sat me on the end of the 4th or 5th row. During the service, this teenage family member gets up to sing, but either because of nerves or talent, he's not that good. He warbles his way through. Everyone is beaming. It's very sweet. Then he goes for a high note and just misses. I'll let out an involuntary snort of laughter and immediately catch the entire row glaring at me with the heat of 400 Karens. I was sitting with his family. I tried to cover it up with nose sniffs and a tissue, like I was just overcome with emotion. Don't know if it worked. I didn't attend the reception. Terrible best man speech. Nice guy but did everything you're not supposed to do in a best man speech. Talked about the groom's ex-girlfriends, actual bad childhood experiences, inappropriate language / swearing, inside jokes that no one could understand, no coherent order to what he was saying, and dragged on for about 15 minutes. Bride and groom both looked bored and pissed off at the same time. Went to a wedding a few years ago. The bride just hung out with her friends on the dance floor and didn't really talk to anyone else. The groom made his rounds, greeting everyone and thanking them for coming. He started off one side of the room sober, and by the time he got to the other side he was so drunk. Everyone was feeding him shots. He ended up getting up on our table and started stripping and dancing. It was hilarious. Then, he went to the bathroom and ripped a paper towel dispenser off the wall. Bride got mad and left him at the reception. He went outside the venue and threw up. Best man ended up taking him home to sleep it off. Bride had no idea where he was the next morning. They are still married and have kids. I was the only unmarried person at a co-worker's wedding. When the bouquet toss happened she just handed it to me. It was like that Jennifer Aniston movie. I was so embarrassed I left. My own wedding. My maid of honor was very self-obsessed and had to make everything about her. When it came time to exchange rings, she said the box is empty. I nearly cried. Then she said kidding, with a big grin on her face. No one laughed. I still hate her for it. I was at a rehearsal dinner and the groom's younger brother, 14-yo, gave a toast. He cracked a joke about one of the groom's ex-girlfriends having the same name as the bride. It was rough. My wife's cousin's wedding. The best man got up for his speech and proceeded to stand there and ugly cry into the microphone. Kept trying to compose himself, but no, just would lose it and start crying again. This went on for what felt like forever, but I think it was really only 2 to 3 minutes before another groomsman gently took him by the shoulder and had him sit back down. Everyone was really uncomfortable, but it is by far my favorite wedding speech that I have encountered. True story. I wish I could provide proof, because nobody will believe me. A cousin of mine was getting married. His wife is a nurse, so there were many doctors in the wedding. It was a huge wedding, over 300 ppl. Some of them very old uncles and aunts that hadn't had alcohol for years. An uncle aged 75 plus had too much alcohol and passed out at the wedding table. All the doctors of the wedding gathered around and were trying to get him up, but he had a suction and he died. The ambulance came, declared him dead, took him, and his close family members left. Even after that the party continued awkwardly. It was too early to end it. After 20 minutes another very old uncle that probably ate too much had heart attack. Again the doctors did CPR on him and were fighting to keep him alive until the ambulance arrived. His daughter aged around 55 to 60 saw her father like that and passed out and hit the stairs with her head and started bleeding. Half of the doctors now went to check on her. Even the doctors were shocked after all these incidents. Eventually the daughter had a concussion and lived while her father died in the hospital. Of course the wedding table stopped. Let me say it again, at wedding with over 7 doctors and many nurses 2 people died and 1 had a severe concussion. At my wedding, my maid of honor did her speech and it was sweet at first. Then she said I was a slut before I met my husband. Everyone face dropped. My dad was furious. My stepdad was about to take the mic off her. It was pretty bad. My mom was blaming herself for not reading the speech beforehand. In all honesty, it was a huge mess. I'm still mad about this, and karma going to be a bitch to her on her wedding day, if that ever happens. Just attended one for my very good high school friend. She is in her late 20s and married the first man she had dated since high school. He is a lovely person, as is she. They should be happy together. Anyway, her dad gets up to speak during the reception. He's an eccentric person, outspoken, etc. For a taste, he had a wardrobe change between the ceremony and reception. His reception outfit was a black paisley suit, and the paisley had Darth Vader designs hidden in it, because he loves Star Wars. He gets up to make his speech, and 1. Says the happiest day of his life was marrying his wife, and the second happiest was the birth of the daughter being married, who is the younger of 2 daughters. The older daughter was sitting right in front of him when he said it, and played it off with a joke, but yikes. 2. Says he has been waiting years for his beautiful daughters to wed, so they can both start pumping out grandchildren for him. Not in a joking way, he was serious. And he said it multiple times, that his beautiful daughters need to give birth before their time runs out. What the fuck? I once attended the wedding of my friend's sister. The groom abandoned her at the altar, but the family had come in from Norway to the US and the catering was non-refundable. So they had the reception anyway. There was sad dancing, awkward activities, and the bride had mascara down her face, and was angry flirting with anyone that moved near her. Most awkwardly painful experience ever. I was the cringe. I went to a wedding with my high school boyfriend and felt super awkward the whole time because we were extremely overdressed. He bought a suit and insisted that I buy a cocktail dress because that was appropriate for the bride's family. I was only given 1 week's notice and didn't have a lot of money, so I bought a dress that could double as my dress for our homecoming semi-formal dance. Turns out his sister's wedding was a potluck at a local park. The vows were done inside of the park rental clubhouse. Basically 4 walls and a ceiling, and not much else. All of the other guests were in jean shorts, or whatever they normally wore on Saturdays. Everyone thought I was the maid of honor or something, because I was in a cocktail dress, and I had never even met the bride. She wasn't even in a wedding dress and the groom was wearing khakis. We stuck out like a sore thumb, me more than him, because he took off his coat and tie, because his mom insisted. I was stuck in a damn homecoming dress. The worst part was that apparently my sanctimonious ex had known this was a $0 wedding, and that his sister had specifically asked people to just come as they were, and bring a hot dish instead of a gift, and have a good time. He didn't think that was the appropriate level of formality, and dragged me into this little protest of his unknowingly. He refused to acknowledge that what we did was inappropriate, and he insisted he was right and the couple was wrong. The couple was super chill about it, but I felt like such an ass. We didn't even bring food. He hadn't told me it was a potluck, probably because he knew that would tip me off. To this day I still wonder if I was even invited to that wedding, since I never met the couple, and it was a small gathering, and it's weird to let a teenager bring a +1. TLDR, my boyfriend tricked me into wearing a formal homecoming dress to a wedding that turned out to be a casual potluck in the park, and I felt like a jerk the whole time. The groom and his mother danced to Every Breath You Take, and kissed on the lips at the end. Also there was no cake. I just don't understand. How can you have a wedding reception without cake? Went to a wedding in Poland. Best man got so drunk he ruined the speeches, passed out in the corridor, and then had a half-hour shouting match with the groom. Next day when the groom went back to the villa they were all staying and the best man had packed his stuff and booked a flight home. They haven't spoken since. My cousin's wedding. The best man's speech started well, but went downhill when he brought God into it. There was then a deeply confusing bit where he compared the groom to Jesus, and by the end of it, the half of the audience who weren't fundamentalist Christians were pretty sure he was in love with the groom. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Goodbye.